Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for this live webinar. The time is now 11:01 a.m. on this beautiful foggy summer morning in San Francisco. And today we're going to be talking about setting up custom warehouse workflows in Odoo using inventory routes. My name is Clark, and I will be hosting today's session, which will be presented by my colleague Richard. Before we begin, I just want to go over a few procedural items for those of you unfamiliar with this format. Today's presentation should take about 45 to 50 minutes. This is going to be a long one today. We'll do our best to keep it short, but that should leave us 10 to 15 minutes for questions during a Q&A session at the end. Throughout Richard's presentation, I will be answering your questions in the chat box, and that's to the right of the video. So keep your questions coming throughout the presentation. I'll do my best to answer them there, and I will also reserve questions that bear going into in more detail for the Q&A session at the end for us to go over. So please keep your questions coming throughout the presentation. Also know that today's session is being recorded, so you can review it at any time by revisiting this page's URL. This is the same as the access link that you received by email if you signed up for the webinar through our website. And if you got here by another means, you can just copy the URL at the top of the page. If you're interested in future webinars, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and you'll be notified. You'll stay up to date on what we broadcast. We broadcast several times a week on a variety of topics in English and Spanish, so hopefully there's something for everybody there. And with that, I will turn it over to Richard.
Thank you, Clark. My name is Richard, the Professional Services Manager here at Odoo. So today we're going to go over routes. As mentioned, the main points are why we use them, what they are, how to configure them, as well as some a use case for you, in which case today is going to be rentals. So first and foremost, you need to have inventory installed. It is an inventory functionality. To install,
sorry, Richard, let me just switch over to your computer.
That would be helpful. So start off with inventory module. Under configuration and settings, you can enable, you want to enable multi or advanced routes specifically. So if you scroll down here, you'll see advanced routings. I already have it enabled here for you. What this does is it enables a new menu item called routes. So what are routes? Routes are essentially they're standard procedures or operations that your business might use from in your inventory inventory department in your warehouse. For instance, receipts, as you can see here, internal transfers, and delivery orders. They're the standard flows that operate within your warehouse when you receive a product when purchasing or delivering a product to your customers for a sale. And you can customize and configure these however you need to do different, more complex routes, and that's what today's going to be covering. Essentially, you'll start off with the general routes when you install Odoo out of the box. We have buy when you install purchase module. You'll have ship only for the sales, and of course make to order is also enabled as a default, and then of course the receipt in one step when you're receiving products from your vendors. So moving on to what they are on the inside. So for instance, when we are buying a product, if we open up the buy route, we'll see the basic configuration here. You have the name which you need to configure. In Odoo, this is standard. And the next part is the applicable on. So where does the route apply? So of course we can start on the highest level, which is the warehouse. So every product will follow this route in this warehouse. Or you can go down lower. So every time you go more granular, that next granular level takes precedence. So warehouses as the highest level. Next is product categories. So a whole product line or categories of products can follow the same rules. After that, you can go to the product specifically. So a specific product will have a very specific rule that you specify. And last but not least, sale order lines. This means you can select it on the line item of your sales order if it's a one-off scenario. A good example of a sale order line would be drop shipping, where you're choosing to drop ship in that particular sales case. And then you have two main categories of operations here, push rules and procurement rules. We'll go over procurement rules specifically first because they're more common. Push rules we'll go over a little bit more later, but essentially you can think of a push rule as the moment a demand is instigated, and how does the demand happen. Procurement rule might be more straightforward. So procurement rule is where the demand is coming from is the source demanding the product. So for instance, let's just go back to this sale, the ship only. In a standard procedure, you ship a product. Who's wanting the demand of the product? That will be your customer. So if we look at the procurement rule, it's who's demanding the product is the customer. That's the procurement location. So let me take a step back and go over the configuration of the procurement rule and what you need to use to configure it. The first, of course, is a name. And in this case, Odoo uses a standard which warehouse it belongs to, where it's coming from, and where it's going to. After that, you have the action. What kind of action is being performed when you procure something or demand is being required? You can do buy, which is a standard Odoo hard-coded action, or you can do move from another location. In this case, it is a move from another location because we're not buying it at this moment yet. The procurement location, the wording can be confusing, but essentially it's the source that is demanding the product or procuring the product from wherever. In this case, it's the customer. So the customer is demanding a product from us, and where we're taking it from is on the right-hand side. Next, it's what creates. It's what Odoo does in the back end. It's going to create a movement, a stock picking, or an operation. A little bit more advanced terminology there, but essentially what's going to happen is it's going to create a move, an operation type. If we actually go, I'm going to switch screens here to show you a little bit more. In the main dashboard of your inventory, you have 3 operation types. You have receipts, which is something you're receiving from your vendors. You have delivery orders, something you're shipping to your customers, and internal transfers for internal movement within your company. These are the 3 different operation types. You can create more for more complex scenarios, or if you want more control and organization of the moved operation types. But inside, all of them are to the transfers. And each transfer is the delivery order and receipt, where you can specify you can see what's going on. In this case, we're shipping out because of the sequence here. It's going to our customer from, and that's where it's, as you can see, a little bit more information, the destination location. And this can change per operation type. And down below in the operations, you see the product, where it's coming from, which is your stock, and of course the customer is where it's going to. So this is a stock move. And that's where I bring up this because of the creation, going back to the previous screen. So what happens when we want to ship to our customer? It's going to our customer who's demanding the product, and it's coming from us, our main warehouse stock location. Of course, you can specify more other locations. However, for simplicity, we will specify our main warehouse stock. And then what's going to happen? The move supply method. We have a few options here: take from stock and create procurement. Procurement, of course, is demanding or receiving product or generating where you get the product from. And so because this is a sale, we're not generating this quite yet. And so what we're going to focus on is take from stock. So we're pulling something from stock and we want to ship it to our customer. Next is picking type. How do we want to organize or categorize this transaction or this move into one of the types we have specified, if you recall, which would be the receipt, delivery, or internal transfer. In this case, we're going to do delivery order because we are delivering it to our customer. So this way, your internal warehouse people, your employees will know that is a delivery. And that's the real reason for specifying the operation type or picking type in this case. And we're delivering. Partner address and delay. Partner address is very used rarely. It depends on the use case. It's not common. And so we're going to leave it blank, and by default it is blank. If you have a partner, a customer who has a very specific move type for whatever reason, this is where you could specify who it belongs to. And delay, of course, modifies the due date or when it needs to get done by. That's the general rule of how the procurement rule works. So if we go back, we can look at some of the other ones of procurement rules. We have make to order and buy. So if we look at buy, for instance, this is a similar operation type where, in fact, it is us who is demanding the product, not the customer. And so when I open it up, you'll see the action is set to buy. And again, as I mentioned previously, this is hard-coded. It has an operation where it's going to automatically follow some rules set in the back end. But this time, the procurement location is us, our main warehouse stock. It's the location that's desiring the product or to get more of it. And the picking type is automatically set to receipts. As you see, it's a more condensed settings here because everything is generally already predetermined in the back end. You can choose to modify this. However, for organizational purposes, receipts is the best option. So we can move on to other operations here as well that are also standard. When you receive a product after the buy, so the buy is a procurement. It's when you want to receive a product from your vendor. Now what happens with the actual receipt? So we have the company receipt in one step. As you see here, there's actually no necessary operations procurement rules because it's already predefined in the backend, hard-coded. And it's specified on the product itself and as well as the warehouse. So if I were to go to a product, I'm going to switch screens here again. I can go to my products, and in this case I have a guitar. And in the inventory tab of the guitar, you'll see the routes that's specified. In this product, I created a rental. We'll go into that in a little bit more. But how do I receive this product? And that's why you specify buy. Make to order is a very special scenario that actually overwrites another scenario, and we can go over that just now. So going back to our routes, you'll see make to order is automatically enabled when you install the purchase module. Make to order essentially is what do you do when a demand comes in from this product, and usually comes from the customer. It's more of a on-demand style approach. And it's specified on the product specifically, not on the warehouse, because unless you want to modify it to be the warehouse or the product category itself or a slew of products. However, in most cases, it's by product. And if we open up the procurement rule, we see here that it is moved from another location like before, and it's our customer demanding it. You'll notice that it's actually very similar to the ship to route. If I may go back to another screen here, go to the configuration and routes to look at this ship only. You'll notice that they are very similar in configuration, where it is moved from another location, it's going to our customer, and coming from our stock. Just like the same thing as we go back to my previous screen. Now the only difference is the move supply method. If I go back to my ship to in the other screen, you'll see it's taking from stock. We're shipping it from our warehouse to our customers. However, that's not always going to be the case. Well, you might want to, we are shipping to our customers, of course, every time. It's more about what happens next. In this case, you're assuming you have it in your warehouse already. That means you manage your products through reorder rules or manually creating purchase orders. However, in the case where this is something you don't keep in stock on a regular basis, well, you don't always have it on a regular basis. So therefore, how do you get it? That's why we're going to create a procurement in this special scenario, where automatically it's going to generate procurement of what to do next. And so the make to order always replaces the ship to. And the only difference, again, is the procurement aspect, and it will create a delivery order. So in order to actually make the best use of the make to order, you actually need to use it in conjunction with your buy route. That is why, if I go back to the other tab and look at the other routes, make to order and buy are always going to be used in conjunction. And if I go back to my product specifically, when I do the configuration in the inventory aspect of the product product and the inventory tab, you'll have buy and make to order. We'll just focus on buy and make to order in this case. So these have to be used in conjunction. If I just have make to order, Odoo doesn't know what to do with it, because if you recall, we have a procurement set on make to order as opposed to take from stock. So if we don't specify how to procure it, Odoo won't know what to do with it, and you'll be left without a PO, so your vendor being sent or generated, or a manufacturing order to manufacture this product to send to your customer. That is why buy has to be enabled in conjunction, and make to order replaces the ship only. Now going back to our routes, we have a very special case here, the rental. Let me make sure this is where we want to go. Now push rules. Push rules are a little bit more advanced. And the reason why we're discussing more is because of how they operate. A procurement rule, or procurement, is essentially who's demanding it, as I previously mentioned. The customer's demanding it in this case, coming from us. Now, a push rule is a rule that is in place so that when a product moves to that specific location, it triggers another action. The demand is triggered upon receipt of the product, as opposed to the demand being triggered upon the request of the product. So if we open up the push rule, and I'm going to go to our route specifically, rental specifically. So a rental scenario is a case where you ship a product out to your customers, and you expect to receive it back at some point in time. And so the trick with that is, how do you manage the receipt, or how do you manage the return of the product after a specified given time? And that's where a push rule comes into play. So in this rental, I created a brand new route called rental, and I'm assigning it to the product because the product, I can choose to either sell it or rent it. But also, I want a sales order line, because not all transactions are going to be a rental, because sometimes it can be a sale. So if I look to the original procurement rule, it is identical to my ship to. My customer's demanding it. It's coming from my stock. And I have the method of taking from stock, and I have the delivery orders. So that's the identical to the ship to. The only difference between the ship to now and the rental is that I want to receive it back. I want to get it back from my customers. So I create a push rule. This push rule, what happens is my source is my customer because they're the ones sending it back to us. The destination location is the stock because I want it back in my warehouse. It's going to be a manual operation because it's not something that automatically happens when one move happens next. So it has to be manual. The picking type. So here's where you can get a little bit more advanced. You can choose receipts. As a general rule, I'm receiving it back into my warehouse because that's what I want to do with it. However, maybe your warehouse workers want to organize it or categorize it in a special, separate route or operation type. For instance, because they don't want to mix up a receipt that is from a rental or a receipt that is to ship back to customers in another way, like selling. In this case, I'm going to stick with receipt. However, you can choose and create more. So what I expect to happen now is when I sell a product or rent it, it's going to generate a delivery order because I'm shipping it to my customer, and then it's going to generate a receipt at the same time. So let's see that in action. So I'm going to go to another tab here, which is the sales module. I'm going to create a quotation. First, you specify customer, who's receiving it, or who's buying from you. Then you specify the product in the order lines. Guitar. And before I move forward, I need to ensure that the rental is selected. It is. Now that it's selected on the rental as a product, I also want to make sure it's on the route to ensure that it is going to be received back. You don't have to do taxes if you wish. This is general sales, and save. Saving doesn't do anything. It doesn't trigger an extra action. But once you confirm, that's when the magic happens. So typically, on a regular sale, you would see one delivery order generated. But because I selected the rental route, it actually generates two delivery orders, or two movements, really. The first movement, this is what you see here. You'll see two movements. One is the out, one is the in. The out being the delivery to the client, and the in being the receipt back of the product from the client. So I have here, you'll see the status is available and waiting another operation. The reason that is because for the receipt back, I can't receive it until it hits the client's location. That's hence the push rule, where once the client receives it, it will then say, hey, time to deliver it back to us, the vendor. So here I can validate delivering our guitar from us to our customer. You can either validate, and it will prompt you to say apply regardless, or you can modify it and specify how much you are going to deliver. So now that I've delivered it, it is now officially in our client's hands. And I go back to my stock operations in the previous screen, you'll see that it is available. Before it was waiting availability. The reason that is because now this product, guitar that I specified to have a push rule, the moment it lands in our client's hands to generate a receipt. And that's why this is becoming available now from our customers to us. And so I receive this here by validating, but of course I want to maybe go back to my inventory module to see how it applies on the dashboard. I have a receipt here and a delivery order here. Pretty standard when you buy and sell products. Now warehouse stock, this is the same thing as you saw on the previous screen. I validate, and I have now received this product back into my warehouse. Of course, it's not instantaneous. Usually what would happen is they would hold on to the product for an extended period of time, and then you'd receive it. And that's where the lead time can come into play, or the days of operation. In this case, it was just automatically received back today. It was maybe a day rental in this scenario. So that is how an advanced push rule can operate. And of course, based on the use case and scenario, the push rules and pull rules will always change. One advanced setting we can look at is actually how Dropship operates. So we'll go back to our sales module, configuration, and settings. Here we can go down to the bottom and enable Dropship. This is actually necessary if you want to use routes on the sales order lines. So if I go back to my inventory, excuse me, is it enabled here? Make to order, Dropship. I might want to refresh this screen. Dropship. Going back to inventory and routes, I want to make sure dropship is there. It is not enabled. I need to figure out where that's coming from. Okay, it's probably because, do I have purchase enabled? I do not. That's installed. Maybe need a refresh of the screen. Purchase is enabled, and this will give me what I want. Going back to the inventory, configuration, and routes is not there like it's supposed to be. Maybe I modified it. Let me see where it's going from. Essentially, the way dropship works is it's not coming from, it's a modification of the ship to. If we go back to a ship to, or ship only, sorry, it's the same concept. We have our customer requesting or demanding the product. However, the difference between a dropship and ship only is that it's not coming from us. It's coming from our vendor. And it will generate a procurement. So it will be very similar to the make to order in that it will generate procurement, it will go to our vendor, and our vendor will drop ship it to our customer directly. That's the main difference between the dropship and our ship to, and when you enable that. I actually do not want to make that change. Let's go back. So that's an example of how you can manage complex routings. The way I envision or can explain a push rule in a different way is the moment a product is entering that location, a new rule is generated. Right now we have a receipt in one step enabled as a good example of how you can actually have rules upon rules and act at the same time. For instance, if I go to my configuration and main warehouse, I can actually modify the incoming shipments and outgoing shipments. In this case, I might want to do pick and ship or pick, pack, and ship. And the reason why you want to do this, in a very small warehouse, you would want to focus mainly on the ship only. You don't need to make your shipping procedures more complex. You want to just ship only. Pick it from the warehouse shelf and then send it out. But sometimes if a multi-scenario or more complex...
Would you just exit the notification?
Gotcha. Going back here, sorry. In a scenario where you want to have more granular roles and responsibilities, maybe you have two inventory people, one person who is picking the product from your shelf and then putting it in a location to then ship it out. That's when you have a pick and pack scenario. Or you might want to have someone putting it into a box and then putting it in a shipping location and shipping it out. Those are the scenarios where you'd want to enable that. What happens is Odoo will automatically configure those for you in these scenarios. If I do enable the third one for the outgoing shipments, it will now generate it will change the procurement rules of our routes. Configuration and routes. Now our pick only or one-step operation has been moved to a three-step. And if we look at how we modified it, it goes down below and you see now there's 3 procurement rules. Why? What's happening? Well, first is taking from stock and putting it into a packing zone. The procurement location is now the packing zone, not the customer. Yes, the customer demanded it in the original sale. However, now we need to move it through our processes in our warehouse in the back end. So the procurement location is the packing zone, which is actually a location that is generated automatically by Odoo the moment you enable the 3-step setting. It's coming from our stock. Same move supply method where it's taking from our stock. And it's changing picking type. Because if we go back, let's go to our inventory, sorry for switching screens, and our main dashboard. We now have 3 more boxes. So I went over this very quickly last time. But this is your main dashboard for your inventory module, where your inventory workers know what they need to do that day. So if you have clearly defined roles or responsibilities, that's where these boxes come in. So of course, receipts, you have somebody who's responsible for receiving your products from your vendors or opening them up, putting them on shelves. Then of course you have our pick, pack, and ship, or ship is the same as delivery orders. So when you make a sale, typically it's just a delivery order that in the one-step mode. In this case, we had enabled multi-step, so now we have somebody who needs to pick and pack, so clearly defined roles and clearly defined steps that needs to be done. So Odoo will automatically generate these new operation types for you. So let's make a sale and see how that flows through. So we'll go to look at our product to make sure it's configured correctly. We will remove the rental. We'll just make it buy. It's not necessary because we actually have some on hand, 17. Now go to our quotations. Excuse me. We'll select the customer and the product. We're not going to specify the route because we want standard procedure here in Odoo. We confirm the sale. What happens now, we have 3 delivery orders, or 3 movements, really. They're all different references. You can see the sequence and 3 operations. The first has to be the packing zone. We need to receive in the packing zone before we do the next step. So as you see, the guitar is coming from stock to our packing zone, validate, and move forward. So as you see, it's just 3 procurement rules. The next step is the output. The output location is demanding it. So if we go back to our routes, you'll see that if we look at the packing zone and output, it's identical to the previous one, except that now it's the output location that's requesting it, and our packing zone is where it's coming from. That's why the 3-step exists, to enable for that. And if you enable the 2-step, that would change, and it would only be 2 of these. It would be stock to output and output to customer, where the packing zone doesn't exist. Now, let's see if there's any other aspects of the push and pull rules that are required. The main settings enabled here. To recap, you have the name of the operation to make it clear for you what's going on. You have the action. Buy is here as a default when you install the purchase module. If you install the manufacturing module, manufacturer will also appear here. Those are hard-coded, simplifying the requirements you need to specify. And of course, the source location where it's coming from, who's requesting it, or the demand is coming from. I have debug mode on, so I can also see the warehouse it belongs to. The move supply method, in this case, it's a created procurement or take from stock. And then, of course, you have the picking type if you want to organize it. I believe that is most of the configurations necessary for these different types. If you don't want to have an operation to be done, but you still want the movement to occur, you can select automatic, no step added. What this will happen is the moment it enters this location, Odoo will automatically push it to the next without a manual intervention. It depends on the use case and specific scenario where you might enable that. I believe that covers most of how operations work. So we covered the make to order, we covered ship only, we covered buy. We covered the rental scenario, which is unique. And I believe that is most of how routes operate. It can be quite complex, and it takes some time to really understand what they're doing. I highly recommend going to our documentation on our website to read them, because it kind of goes over a little bit briefly of how to, what they are and how they operate. And so to reiterate, a procurement rule is a response to a demand to have a product at a specific location by creating a delivery order, a receipt, or internal transfer, or even a manufacturing order. While the push rule responds to the arrival of the product in that specific location, and then you're telling Odoo what to do next with it. I believe we might be going to questions if there are any. Now, you also have sequence, actually, while I'm waiting for questions to be generated. Sequence just modifies where it is in the order here. You can also just drag and drop it. It doesn't have any big ramifications when it comes to the order of this.
Great. Thank you, Richard. Lovely presentation. Sorry for the delay there. I was lost in answering a question by Santiago Lopez. But let me first jump back to the very top of the page and answer a few questions as they came in chronological order. First of all, Andrew asks, is there a way to reset routes back to the default settings? Some of them have been modified and deleted in our instance and are no longer working correctly.
There's no way to reset, unfortunately. Essentially, you've already modified it. One thing you can do is you can open up a new test instance and look at the routes that are specified and mimic them. Unfortunately, nothing in Odoo is retroactive. So if you modify something in Odoo, it only changes things moving forward. So your past data will still be there, which is kind of a good thing from an accounting perspective and inventory management perspective to see historically what happens. Resetting routes, no. There's no magic reset button to click and all the routes are magically back the way they are, because there are, of course, movements in the past that have happened that you can't modify.
Exactly. So this is a great time to offer the disclaimer again that modifying your routes is advanced configuration, and you should test extensively in a test database before moving any of this to production, because the possibility is very real to create a huge amount of work undoing any mistakes. So absolutely be very careful when configuring custom routes. And with that, let's move on to the next question. This rental product in your demonstration, that can be received with a barcode, right, Richard?
Absolutely. Anything can be received with a barcode. A receipt or any movement actually is quite easy with a barcode, as long as you have the barcode field enabled here, as well as your locations with the barcode enabled. If I go back to my inventory, every location has the ability to have a barcode. And this way, Odoo will recognize that when you scan it, it will know what the value is and move forward with it. So just like anything in Odoo, barcode is enabled. In fact, there is the application barcode, which makes it easier for your picking. You can install this, and it comes with a nice UI for your inventory workers to work on a tablet or even a computer if they still want to, or even on a small iPhone, iPad, Android device. So the barcode works similarly to the inventory application, except it looks nicer UI. And you can click on inventory. This is more for inventory adjustments, and of course operations. So you'll see the same Kanban view, the same boxes you saw previously. If I go back to another tab here and the main dashboard, similar setup, more condensed for a tablet mobile device with a smaller screen. You could either choose to keep it this way and of course receive these, and you can open them up and scan the products that you're wanting to receive and move, as well as the locations, or you can actually use this same process, click on the transfers, and move the product that way, as long as the barcode is enabled, because if you don't have the barcode set up on the product or the location, Odoo won't know what you're scanning.
Great. Thank you, Richard. And I might add that to get a picture of what this might look like on a tablet or mobile screen, you can zoom in on your browser. It's going to be big buttons.
Zooming in, it looks more like this on a larger scale, smaller device.
Let's see. Now let's move on to the next question. Santiago Lopez is asking, so we have shelf 1 and 2, children of stock location. The first is for sealed package units, and the second is for single units. So in a move supply method, take from stock, how does Odoo choose the picking? In simplified terms, how does Odoo choose what to pick when the rule is talking about stock, but you have child locations of stock?
So Odoo will always, as a default, follow FIFO, first in, first out. So yes, you can have a hierarchy of locations, which I did not cover necessarily, which we can easily do. Going back to my inventory, you'll see, of course, these locations. You can have children locations nested underneath them. And if you have product there, it will follow the FIFO route, first in, first out, picking from when you received that product first. If you need to modify that, the only way to modify it is to either in the receipt change the location you're picking from, or you can also use serialization, which allows you to bypass the FIFO and specify the exact serial number you want to pull. Otherwise, if you want to specify in a more complex manner where you're pulling stock from, you could use routes to go that granular, to actually move product through your inventory how you see fit. And that's a lot more advanced and might require additional assistance from somebody who has a lot more experience with the inventory module.
Great. Thank you, Richard. Here's a question from Mr. Khan. He's asking about the propagation options in the procurement rules.
I had a feeling this was going to come up. So propagation is quite advanced, and mainly the reason why I didn't want to cover it too much. So essentially, if I go back to inventory, configuration, routes. So buy is where you want to where propagation actually really applies. So essentially the way this works is by default, propagation will leave empty. You will create a new, let me take a step back. Propagation is used on how you want to procure. Propagation is only used for procurement, meaning you're buying a product or manufacturing a product. Now in standard Odoo, if you make sales for a single product, let's just say guitar, and I sell 10 to 10 different customers, and I don't rent, in this scenario, we're just going to keep it simple, and I only buy. It's a make-to-order product. It's a very common scenario where I only buy it when I need it, so I don't have inventory on hand. Now, propagation means what happens if I have 10 sales, 10 customers who want to buy from us, and I have one vendor for that guitar. Until I confirm that PO, all those 10 guitars or X guitars from those 10 clients will be in one purchase order. Now, you may have scenarios where you actually want separate POs per order, and that's where propagation comes in. Propagation, you can do propagate, which when you do propagate, what will happen is for every sales order that comes in and the make-to-order product is generated, or the procurement is generated on the make-to-order, if you recall, it will generate a new PO every single time. It'll be from the same vendor, so Guitars R Us will send it to us. We'll have 10 POs for the number of guitars you want per sales order. Now, if you don't want that, you can do fixed as well. Fixed means it will generate its own. You can specify its own procurement. You can do it your own. Fixed is quite uncommon, and it's more for advanced scenarios. But typically, you're going to follow the leave empty, meaning it will aggregate everything into one PO, or the propagate, meaning it will have a different PO per sales order.
Great, thank you, Richard. Let's see. Let's move on to the next question here. This one is from MTJ603. He's asking about, or he or she is asking about virtual locations / production routes used in MRP inventory moves.
Okay.
That's a pretty broad inquiry, I'd say.
Correct.
Could you, do you have a favorite topic to address there? Or?
There's no difference in rules how Odoo operates when it comes to a physical location and a virtual location. If I go to my locations, of course the default filter here is to be on the internal so you can see what's going on. And this is where most of the stock movements and stock management is going to happen. However, if you remove the filter, of course you see all the other locations available to you by default. I have not created any locations in this scenario. Virtual locations are your customers, your production, of course, your vendors, anything of the sort. If you recall from the routes in our buy set, yes, we're buying from stock, but because it's buy, there's actually a hidden field here, which is the source, which automatically is set to the vendor virtual location. If I go back, because you'll see that there's, oops, wrong screen, you'll see that there is a partner location vendor. These are still considered virtual locations, more or less. If I actually go back to the ship to, shifting screens in one more time, as you see, our customer is the one procuring it. So it's irrelevant. So if you actually want to add a step, for instance, before you manufacture, you actually want to pick the product, put in a specific location before you start manufacturing, you can do that with the push and pull rules so that when you generate a manufacturing order, the procurement is generated, well, first, before you can even manufacture it, you receive the product into this one location, you pick it, so your pickers know that they need to do it for you. That is how virtual locations can work. So they can still be added to the rotation of procurement and push rules.
Great. Thank you, Richard. MTJ, if you have more questions about that, please let us know. And for now, we'll move on. Here's a quick question from Yusuf, and this applies to anybody who's just joining us today. You can go back and watch this recording at any time. If you missed the beginning, you can just move the slider bar at the bottom of the YouTube video back to the beginning and watch it from the beginning. So if you missed something, if you want to see something again, just go back. This recording is always here in full. And let's see. Next we have a question from Shane Peabody. He asks, if you have one warehouse but 3 separate locations that use the same part, when receiving, is there a way to say that this part goes to section 1 and 3? I think you mean, is there a way to always force a part to go to a specific location? Always force a...
Yes, you can. That's what the push rule before. Essentially, you would assign a push rule to that product or a new route, essentially, and then assign it to that product. And then once it hits stock, automatically, the procurement location, this is just try to show you a little bit of this. When we look at the push rules, to reiterate what that means is the push rule responds to a product entering that location. So you receive this product from your vendor and you want it, you have stock as a main location, but underneath it you have 3 other locations and you want it to automatically go to one of the other 3. Well, you need to specify specifically where it goes, and that's where the source location is. So it's once it hits the source location, which would be stock, you're going to want it to automatically go to another location, which could be shelf 1, shelf 2, etc. However, if you want it to be able to go to 2 separate locations, that becomes more complex, and we need to dive into that a little bit further, because the push rule, if you tell 2 push rules on a single product, what's Odoo supposed to do? It's kind of like you want it to go left and right at the same time for this one product. It's not really feasible. So yes, you can do that, but then you are making it more complex to manage your inventory. You're adding more steps, more clicks, and in some cases more of a headache. What we recommend, if you know that you want a product to go to a specific location upon receipt, is if we go to our products real quickly. I'm going to go here, inventory module, to look at our products. What we recommend to just simplify everything in a more easy scenario is you have the notes here, and you can actually put in the exact location where you want it to be in the description for receptions, so that when someone's receiving it, they can look at it and put it. They know exactly where to put it. Of course, in a smaller warehouse, your warehouse employees are going to know where to put it automatically because they're going to memorize everything. So they're going to know that where they want it and how they want it. So it's less relevant in that case. But theoretically, yes, you could use a push rule or pull rule to put it into this specified location as you see fit. Again, that makes it complexes the scenario entirely.
Great, thank you, Richard. Let's see, let's move on to the next question. Acroft asks, is there a way to track expenses between stock and push rules? For example, in a way to use landed costs but between locations, to know what is the shipping cost of the product rule for sales. I think basically to track costs on a move-by-move basis. Do you know if that shows up in the stock valuation report or?
So when we talk about landing costs, we're actually going more into accounting as well. Well, yes, inventory control, you have landing costs enabled here. It is an inventory function. It takes into play with our landing cost functionality takes into play an account with our accounting module at the same time. So what happens is you receive a product and there's a receipt generated or a stock movement, very much like this warehouse pack. Or if I go back to my inventory module, and you'll see our all operations, you'll see the reference. So you can specify which reference. For instance, I receive 1 unit of a guitar into my warehouse in this warehouse in. Then I want to say apply a $10 shipping fee to it. And landing costs will allow you to select this movement, and apply a cost to that. And that's where quants come into play, the reporting and inventory valuation. There's actually a value associated to that product on the right-hand side here. Since I don't have accounting enabled or configured in this case, it's going to be 0. Or that actually comes from the cost of the product itself. So you want to assign a cost valuation per move, you can do that. You can actually modify it. You just have to select the correct picking operation to do it too. And I'm not sure if that's answering your question or not.
Yeah, and absolutely. We have a webinar on landed costs, which you can find in our YouTube playlist. I'll drop that link in the chat in just a minute. For that, it's all about product costing, but it does also go into landed costs. So I'd recommend that you look into that because that addresses landed costs in more detail than we are here right now. But thank you, Richard. And let's move on to the next question, which is going to be from Nestor. He's asking, can I select a different location? Let's see if I'm reading this right. Can I select a different location of raw materials when the finished product is created by a manufacturing route? By default, the selected is stock location. I think, can I select different locations of either component products or of destination locations of that manufactured product?
Yes, and that ends up becoming more complex routing again, which is okay. It's quite common in a manufacturing scenario to where you have a location for your raw materials, raw goods. You have a production location, work in progress, and then you also have your finished goods, and that's all configured on these routes. So the nice thing about what happened to V10, or maybe it was V9, I don't recall, where manufacturing ended up becoming its own route, and that has implications where you can actually have more control and more advanced scenarios you can manage. So essentially, you're going to have to play with the routes and the operation types so that it picks from a specific location. For instance, if I look at the manufacturing and the general settings of the manufacturing, you'll see the default source location is stock. and the default destination is stock. You'll need to mess with this configuration here as well as the routes so that it will pull from another location you generated, like a raw goods, raw components location. Maybe it's just your general inventory, and then the finished good will go into another location called finished goods. And then, of course, if you want work in progress in the middle, you'll need to add another route and another location called work in progress, or maybe even add a virtual location for that because it's not actual. Maybe it is physical or not. Maybe it is. So that's how you can enable that. It is a configuration with the routes as well as the operation types.
Great. Thank you, Richard. We have a follow-up question. This one is from MTJ asking, can I have multiple virtual locations for production, for different products, for different routes?
You can, absolutely, but then you're going to have to modify the routes again to have more. Because essentially, if we look at the routes specifically, because now that manufacturing is enabled, we have a manufacturer route. And it's again, more of a procurement, very similar to buy, where we're taking it into stock. So if you want to have several locations for where your components are going to go, you need to change the manufacturer. Now, if you, of course you do nesting, where you have a child location underneath it, you can actually on the receipt change where it goes. Manufacturing is it's a little bit trickier when it comes to that because you have to actually manually select it there, unless you want to automate, in which case you have to have a new manufacturing route for each difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And the goal, the stated goal here is to have different products be sent to different locations when they're done being manufactured.
Absolutely. And that's why you're going to have new routes for every single location you want it to go. Maybe you have a product line A that goes into this location, product line B that goes into another. Therefore, you might actually want to have two different manufacturing routes apply to different warehouse maybe, or apply to different categories, where it will then, the different locations are procuring the manufactured product or the components, and you have to specify where you want it to go. That, of course, can get quite complex. You might want to draw out your workflows and figure out where everything goes based on the product or the scenario.
Got it. Thank you. Let's move on to the next question. This is a question about best practices from Jason C. He's asking if push rules are the best option for configuring support for subcontractors, i.e. sending a part out for a subcontractor at a point in the manufacturing process, sending something out to be painted, and then bringing it back into your manufacturing line.
This is quite complex. We've done it. We've had scenarios like this before. So essentially, the complex thing about it is where to send it to in the middle of the process. So it depends on where in the process you're actually doing is it at the end or is it at the beginning? Let's say, for instance, a simple example is you have a piece of glass that you want to temper it or whatever, or etch it. Well, in which case you might not even need to use manufacturing for that. You can actually mess with your routes to have more than one receipt or delivery. When you confirm this sale, etc., you can pick from stock the main glass item, ship it to your vendor, and have it as an intermediate step, and then from there bring it back and then ship it to your customer. You could use it that way. You don't even need to use manufacturing orders or manufacturing module to do that because it's the same product, just been modified or etched. So that's one way you can do that. But then, of course, the complexity there is then you need to generate a purchase order so that you can you could generate the purchase order from there and receive it because then the invoice we generate, so you can pay your vendor that way. So you can add an intermediary step that generates a procurement. But that gets quite complex and needs mapping out. It depends on the scenario because every scenario is different, and the subcontracting can happen at different times. Let's see I'm trying to remember how we handled it before, but I can try to go back to it if I recall exactly the setup that's necessary.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Richard. And Jason, if you want to get into this in more detail, ask your partner, ask your consultant, or send an email to events@odoo.com. And we could look into it for you and try to point you in the right direction. But generally, yes, I'd say that is a feasible way to do it, but it can absolutely add a high degree of complexity to your configuration and your operations. So beware of using routes like that. But I would say,
I mean, it's doable. It's
feasible. Yeah.
I mean, we have to do a little bit of. The last time we had to do it was a very scenario where a client wanted to buy a product from one vendor A, ship it to vendor B because they never touched it, and then from vendor B it went to their main warehouse. So they didn't even touch the components or the finished good, and that is quite complex where we actually have to there's some manual operation there, or you have to customize it to do some automation. That's just an extreme example, another side example of how it can be quite complex to manage a subcontracting in Odoo.
Got it. Excellent. Thank you, Richard. Here we have another question from Shane. He's asking if we can put a specific route on the purchase side that would tell our receiving department where the part goes.
You could. Essentially, what's going to happen if you do that, if I go back to the product configurator, is each product, you're going to have multiple buys here. Because right now, if we recall from the buy operation, switching screens, buy is automatically going to, in this procurement, stock. You can specify exactly where you want it to go. And this goes back to the previous topic of complexifying your scenario. If you have 100 products and each one goes to a specific location, you're going to have 100 different buys. And you have to make sure you set up on the product which buy it's going to be. So, of course, this list will just grow. It will go down with 100 different checkboxes to select from. So you might want to, in fact, change it to maybe a tag so where you can actually select the right one and it looks more visually appealing. But theoretically, yes. If you want to do that, the different buy route per product to go to a specific location.
I would say that a simpler solution might be to use just the notes section. Leave a note for your warehouse staff, because fundamentally these are actions being performed by people in pretty much every case, I'd say. And so that is going to simplify your configuration immensely if you go that route.
Yeah, and automating everything, which is, of course, nice, can lead to restrictions. If you automate everything, what happens in an off-case scenario where you actually don't want it to go there? That's why we, as people, know what's best for that particular scenario. That's why it's good to have a little bit more control on how we want to do it. If we limit ourselves too much in these scenarios, then to fix it might be even more of a headache than to actually set it up the right way the first time.
Exactly. It's difficult to design a system that anticipates every possible scenario. And so leaving some flexibility for a human to step in and do what they know to be the right action, that's something that you should strive for when configuring your Odoo database.
Absolutely.
Let's see. Let's move on to the next question now. Mr. Khan again asks, or another question from Mr. Khan, a new question. Is it possible to show the scheduler and the reordering rules of inventory? That is a little bit outside the scope of this webinar. We do have a straight inventory webinar just talking about managing stock using the scheduler and the reordering rules. And that is available in the YouTube playlist that I just linked in the chat. That's just going to be, I don't remember the exact title. It has inventory in it. It's presented by our colleague Brett Heidemann, who is really excellent at explaining things like that. So I'd recommend looking there for that information. And for now, let's move on to the next question from Mohammed. He's asking if we can change the default stock location of a warehouse. For example, we have products in a warehouse stock location, and we need to define a parent location of warehouse stock and make it a default location of warehouse. Just could you generally talk about what degree of flexibility you have with setting up your physical locations in Odoo in your warehouse?
Absolutely. So I went straight to warehouses when you asked that question. So essentially, you'll see here in the list view or tree view the warehouse name and the location stock. Clicking on it, of course, you don't really see it here. But if we go to debug, I'm just going to do it from the browser. We should be able to see the location we want to specify. You can do that. Technical information here. And then, of course, the moment you go in debug, you're automatically assuming there's going to be more advanced configuration necessary. And, of course, be careful when you do these kind of things because you can mess up your scenario. So there's already movement here. So as you can see, I can't modify these. These are already set to read-only as a default. So you would need to customize it to make it editable so you can change it. And, of course, if you do something like this, I highly recommend you do it early on before you even start doing anything in your implementation or before you start actually doing movements. So this is how you can change where things go. So, of course, we don't have quality control enabled, but if we wanted it, we can have another step for quality control. And you can see the main operation types here. So if you have multiple warehouses, you can configure and change the location types here. I want to question what the scenario could be where you want to modify that. But if we go back to another tab and look at locations, you can rename these. This is modifiable, and you can change the parent and child hierarchy and add nesting there. So to answer your question, yes, I urge caution and more use case-by-case scenario.
Absolutely. I think especially in that use case, I would urge caution because why do you need to put something above stock? Just rename stock and then put things below it. there may be something hard-coded that's looking for that stock location.
Correct. There might be some cases where the ID of actually the physical location itself in the UI or the URL is actually, there are some cases where the ID is hard-coded to be used. An example is price lists in a scenario. But we're not going to dive into that at the moment. But we'd have to talk to a technical person to know exactly what ramifications it would have to change these kind of settings.
Absolutely. Use extreme caution when modifying these top-level default locations. It's much safer to just create things below them because you know that will work. But if you modify stock or if you put something in between warehouse and stock, there may be something that you're touching that you don't know that you're touching and you don't mean to touch. So caution when doing that, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Let's see, Bonnie is asking if Odoo supports 2 units of measure for stock tracking.
2 units of measure for stock
2 different
tracking.
units of measure.
So your unit of measure in Odoo has to be 1. And quite an easy example is eggs, for instance. I want to store it for whatever reason in 1 unit, so 1 egg at a time. That is the basis. You can purchase in dozens or you can purchase in pallets, and you can choose to sell in dozens, but you have to maintain a single unit of measure. Now, if for whatever reason you want to maintain more than 1, you would have to create a new product for that. Logistically, it can be quite complex how to manage it from an inventory perspective. So in which case, the answer would be no. You have to have 1 main unit measure, very much like accounting, 1 main currency you use, and everything's converted into. So you're always going to convert into your main unit of measure, but you can buy and sell in different depending on the scenario.
Exactly. So just to say that again in a different way, you keep stock in 1 unit of measure, but you can buy and sell in different units of measure as long as they are convertible. For example, you can buy something in gallons and then sell it in ounces or milliliters. But you couldn't, for example, buy in gallons and then sell in
weight, or not necessarily weight, but like
you can set up your units of measure custom so that you can create your own conversions between them.
But they have to be in the same category, essentially. So like gallons and ounces, those are a category of weight. You couldn't sell unless you chose to have a gallon as a unit. You couldn't sell as a gallon or buy as a gallon and then convert into or sell it as a unit because they might not be in the same category. And that's something covered more in depth in the inventory webinar that I believe we had in the past.
Absolutely. Yeah, and those those units of measure are quite flexible. You can set up your own units and your own categories, and those unit of measure categories can be interconverted between freely. Units of measure within the same category can be converted between freely, but you're keeping stock in 1 unit of measure and you're converting for buying and selling. Right. If that makes sense.
How Odoo handles it is there 1 base 1 and every other unit measure in that category is just a multiplier of that 1 base unit measure. So the base unit measure is a unit of 1. Everything else is either larger or smaller based on that 1 unit.
Great. That was a bit roundabout, but hopefully that answers your question. Let us know if you have more questions, more follow-ups. Here's one last question from Noor. How can I set up the inventory app to track inventory that is used by the company as an expense and not delivered to customers? So how do you track? Let's see. I'd be really curious to hear a use case about that, Noor. How can I set up the inventory app to track, expensed products, things like office supplies, or are you using these products to manufacture something?
My first thought, without knowing a little bit more, is to put it as a consumable product. And then now once we go into expense, of course, we're talking about accounting. And so you will need to have a product set up as a consumable because what consumable versus stockable only applies stock management. So if you run low of a consumable, a reorder is not going to affect it if it's a consumable. And a make-to-order is not going to affect it because you're not managing that aspect. You're just going to be visually looking at the product and say, I need to order more. Example would be toilet paper, paper roll, paper towels, anything of the sort where you just buy as needed and you don't actually manage it. And then you set up a category for those kind of consumable products to then have the accounting set up so that it will hit the expense account. Theoretically, yes, you'll be managing inventory for that product in terms of you actually have a unit quantity in your inventory. You can actually see it in your report, but you're not being able to have an automatic stock movement generated because of it.
Yeah, exactly. And if you're perhaps using these products to produce things, there's the manufacturing app. Otherwise, it's going to be an accounting solution.
Yep.
We have one last question from Acroft. We're 1 minute over time, so I'll wrap it up after this one. Acroft is asking, how do routes combine with the delivery methods in the Odoo e-commerce shop?
I believe at this moment they are not linked. So the delivery methods, how they handle or how they are used essentially is to determine, they are linked in the sense that you need a delivery method they're linked in that you have a delivery method on a delivery order. It's mostly used for costing aspect of how much you're going to charge your customer for delivery, overnight, 2-day, ground, etc. If I go back to a picking, all transfers here and out, let's see. There will be a delivery method down below if you enable it in the sales. Essentially, it's also more used for the integration with UPS, FedEx, USPS, anything of the sort where you want a label generated PDF form that you can just print to your machine. But they aren't related to the stock moves, so there's no interrelation there. The only reason to have it is to generate the label. When you click validate on the delivery order, it will say you've shipped it, more or less, and generate the label for you to print and stick it on the box. But the costing aspect doesn't come into play when it comes to stock movements. That's an accounting aspect related to your inventory valuation, but not when it comes to expensing the shipping aspect or charging your customers for it.
Great. Thank you so much, Richard. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I am going to have to wrap it up here. We're 2 minutes over time, but we really appreciate you guys all coming out and asking questions. We hope you learned something, and we hope you liked it enough to come back for our next webinar. Please subscribe to our channel to be notified of all of our upcoming broadcasts. Again, we broadcast generally every Wednesday morning. This is at 11 a.m. Pacific time and 2 p.m. Eastern time. And we also broadcast in Spanish on Tuesdays if that's something you're interested in. So please subscribe to our channel. And again, thank you all so much. And I'm just going to go ahead and end the stream here.
Thank you.
In about 2 seconds. Goodbye, everybody.